If we take a look in both of our LWCAD tabs, both LWCAD and LWCAD Extended, we notice we have our snap panel available in both. I'm just going to go ahead and open this up right now, and we can take a look at some of our different primitives and how our snapping in different settings work. Most of the primitives are pretty straightforward, but in order to explain most of these snap settings, I'm just going to start out with the line tool. To initialize the line tool, we basically just draw out and click and draw, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off angle snap, and we'll go over that in just a minute. But what we can do is just draw out our points, and we can also see our dimensions right now. If you don't see them, just hit N on the keyboard to pull up your numeric panel, and we can see we have an option for show distance and show angle, so we can enable those on and off. And it's completely interactive and updates, so we'll be able to completely see exactly what it is we're creating. Within the numeric panel, we also have a couple other options. You can see we have curved Booleans on top. I'm going to get into those a little bit later. Right now, we're just going to turn those to off. What we can also do is we have two different modes. We have handle mode and pivot mode. With pivot mode, we move the entire object. And depending on which point we have selected, we can use that to snap to other objects. You can also see underneath our mode that we have a point number, which is 0.3 right now, and as we click on different points, we can see that update to different point numbers, and that's based on the order in which they were created. And we can easily use our slider on the right and just kind of control and cycle through each of the different points, and as we create new ones, we will see new point numbers show up. If we switch to the handle mode, we can edit each of our individual points, and we don't have to worry about moving the entire object. We can also define our position by numeric entries. And we can also select closed line. Now with closed line, what's going to happen is it's going to create one additional point, extending the point we've already created, to connect our LW curve together. And what you also notice is our last point is not part of the first point. So if I go all the way to the end to point 8, point 8 is our last point, and we can see we have point 1. And now if I go and click close line again, we will now have 9 points. So it creates that additional point to connect. So now let's take a look at our snap panel and some of our different options that we have. I'm just going to leave this up and just kind of move our viewport a little. We're going to enable that line tool once again, and this time we're going to use our snap panel, and you can see we have a bunch of different options for snapping. We have near, end, point, perpendicular, tangent, center, intersection, and projection. If I go ahead and click on near, what this is going to allow us to do is snap to a line. So we're not in any specific point or any specific area of the line, we're just snapping directly to the object, and that way we can make sure that we are on the object. So I can go ahead and click off. We can snap back to near. So now these lines are directly connected to our object. Even though we still have them as separate curves, as we can join them together later, we don't need to worry about there being any spacing in between because we use that near setting. I'm going to go back and turn on our line tool. Also note that you can right mouse click when you're completed with creating a line if you'd like to create another one, and that goes for any of the tools. So if we make any of the primitives or any shapes or anything, and we like what we've got, but we want to make another one using the same tool, we could just go ahead and right mouse click, and that's very similar to using AutoCAD and other drafting programs. And of course, it's also like a lot of native LW commands. we take a look at our next snap option, which is end, this will basically allow us to snap to points. Although more specifically the end of an item. Although we can also see that we can snap to pretty much any of these points using the end command. And we can also note that we can actually see the text show up of exactly what it is we're pointing or snapping to. So if we have multiple snapping options on, I'll turn on near and end, so we can see near and then end, and that way we know exactly what we're snapping to. So that way if we're kind of close to a point, we're not sure, then we'll be able to see exactly what it is that we're snapping to. And now I'm going to turn on point, which allows us to snap our lines to specific points. Like I said, it's very similar to the end tool. Okay, we'll move on. Our next is going to be perpendicular. So if we click on perpendicular, we can see now when we create our line that we snap to this area to make an exact perpendicular line off of this object. So that way we have a 90-degree angle no matter where we start out. So if I could come up here and create a line, pull it down, and you'll see we snap right when we reach that perpendicular part. So that's very helpful. I'll go ahead and turn that off. And next we have tangent. In order to really see tangent, we're going to need a different sort of shape. So I'm going to delete our current object that we have, and I'm going to go down to the More section, and you might not see this More section because everything right now is being very compressed on my screen, basically for recording options. I am recording at a lower resolution than most people usually work at, and that's basically for response within recording and still being able to operate Lightwave correctly while recording the screen. So now we have a circle command, and I'm just going to pull this out, and we can take a look in our numeric options for a circle. You see it's pretty straightforward. We can adjust our radius, and we can also show whether or not we'd like to see what our radius is. And we also have those curved Boolean options. What I also want to note is that we also have a sketch color option, which allows us to define basically a visual representation of certain objects, and that way we can separate things. It also plays a very large role when we're exporting DXF files. If we want to export something we've created and we want it to be in multiple layers, well, the layers in Lightwave don't translate to the DXF file, and that is the limitation of Lightwave. So when we export, in order to define specific layers, we can use these sketch colors to define which layers. And we're going to take a look at our perspective view. And right now we don't see that sketch color, but if we switch to wireframe shade, then we'll be able to see our sketch color. And we can also switch to our color wireframe mode and see these sketch colors as well. So I can go ahead and change this, and we can see it update automatically to any of the specified colors. And I'm just going to switch this to wireframe shade. I'm going to set that to red so we can really see it in the contrast to our dark gray background. I'm also going to note that I do have the grid turned off in our display options for Lightwave, just so we can see what it is we're working on a little bit easier. Okay, so now we have this circle created, so I'm going to hit the space bar to end that tool. I'm just going to move these off to the side just a little and zoom out of our viewport. And we're going to take a look and go back to our line tool, and now you can see we still have tangent on. So I'm going to go ahead and click off and just start creating a line basically anywhere. And now when we come to our object, you can see we snap to tangent. And that allows us to have a very nice curve and a very nice blend into our circle. And this is similar to the tangent tool that's available in a lot of drafting programs. So we can come up here and also make that curve inward. And it's a very good way to design objects and create connections to rounded areas. And next we have our center snap. And now this is going to snap to the center of a specific curve. So if we've created an object made up of several different curves and they're not joined together, what's going to happen is we're going to end up snapping to the center of each of those individual lines. So let's take a look at the way we have our curve set up right now. We have one curve made for our circle in the center, and then two curves for our lines that we've created on the outside. So now that we have center on, I'm going to go to Snap, or go to our Line tool and see the snap for our center. You can see we can snap to the center of this line, or we can go to the center of this object. You also note that even though I'm sort of in the center of the object, we're not really snapping to that center. So if we move over to the side and actually go on the object, then it knows to snap directly to the center of that object. And we'll come back to this a little bit later once we start taking a look at the curved Booleans and how sets of different segments and different types of lines creating a shape can really affect the way that center snap works. Go ahead and close that out. And the next thing we're going to take a look at is intersection. Now, intersection has to really do with some of our curved Boolean commands and also some of our 2D Boolean when we're combining objects. So now will be a good time to go over our curved Boolean options. I'm going to go ahead and just hit delete to clear out everything we've created. And let's go back to our circle tool. And I'm just going to pull out our circle and just make a simple size here. And let's go to our curved Boolean option. Now right now, by itself, we're really not going to see any results. Unless we have it on subtract, then we'll see nothing. But on off right now, I'm going to go ahead and right mouse click. And now let's select add. So now when I draw out our next circle, you can see we're adding to our object. And it makes a very nice intersection. And these points are considered intersections. What we can also use is the subtract, and that way we can subtract from our object in a nice interactive Boolean for these 2D shapes. And then we can also have an intersect option, which is similar to having it set to off, except that we can see we have new points intersecting our two objects, and that way they're connected. They share an equal point. And that's exactly what this intersection tool in the snap panel will allow us to snap to. So I'm just going to hit the spacebar to clear that out. We're going to go back to our line tool, and now we have that intersection command on. And now you can see we can snap to those intersected points. We won't be able to snap to anything else, just our objects that are intersected. Of course, we can use this with other commands as well, and other different types of snapping features. So we can snap from one intersection to another. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Now we're going to go to our rectangle tool. And I'm just going to draw out a rectangle with our intersection selected. Go back to our line. And now you can see we can also snap to those intersections. So anytime we create an intersection, we can snap to it using the intersection option in our snap panel. The next snapping option we're going to look at is our last one in this first set, and that's our projective snap. And I'm going to turn off intersecting right now, or intersection snap. And you can see it's grayed out right now, and that's because we really have to depend on another tool in order to activate that. So we could turn near on to use projection. We could also turn the end on. And you can see with point it doesn't work. With perpendicular, we can see it show up. Tangent, not with center, and not with intersection. So we have a couple different ones we have to use in order to use our projective snapping. And you can kind of understand why once you start to see it in action. So I'm going to turn on near right now, or actually I'll use end and set to projection. You can also see that our ruler snap has come on, which was grayed out before. And we'll go over that in just a minute. But first what I'm going to do is draw a line. And now you can see we don't really see a lot of options until we scroll over our points. And now we can select these points of which we want to project off of. And this will give us a perfectly straight line projection from our object, so that way we can create a line that's completely straight. And we could use multiple selections for this. And that way we can project how we need to. And I'll select this point up here as well. So now you can see we can project from both of these lines. And we get a very nice blue line that shows up and lets us know that we are projecting. We also get these little crosshairs that show up on all of the points that we have selected and enabled for our projective snapping. So that way we can draw lines from any of these different points to project offward off of an object. So that's very cool. And now let's take a look at our ruler snap. And our ruler snap will only be enabled if we have projection snapping on or near snapping on. With any of the other different tools, it'll be grayed out. But that's because we're dependent on specific lines when we're using our ruler snap. So I'm going to go back to near so that we can use our ruler snap. And we can just use these existing objects that I've already created. I'm going to go to our line tool, turn on ruler snap, and now you can see we have two different modes. We have an absolute mode and a relative mode. Absolute will allow us to define snapping based on a specific value. So let's go ahead and click in here. And you can see with our ruler, since we have it set to 5 feet, we are creating a line every 5 feet. And we could change this to any value we want. I could increase this or decrease this. Let's just change this down to 2 feet. So now we are snapping to every 2 feet. And that way you can be a little more specific about what it is that you're modeling, so we don't have any in-between values. I'm just going to undo that, turn the line back on, and our next mode is relative, which allows us to divide a specific curve equally in a certain amount of divisions. So I can increase, right now we have a division of 4. I'm going to increase this to 6, and I'm going to create our first point. And as we roll over our line, we can see it's divided 6 times. So as I increase and decrease this value, we will notice it change. Change this up to 20 divisions. And now you can see we have our line divided in 20 different points that we can snap to, or 20 divisions. Change this down to 2. And now we can see we have what is 3 points, but 2 total divisions. So keep in mind, it's not the point level, it's the actual division amount. So we have 1 division here and 1 division here. Increase this to 30. And now we can see we have a very tight amount of points in there that we can snap to. But it's a very useful tool. And you can also see as we move along to smaller objects, different lines, you can see now we have all of these 30 points extremely compressed because this is considered a curve of its own. And it's in its own real segment when using the ruler tool. So let the spacebar to clear that out, turn off ruler snap, and now we're going to go down, and what we can see is we have the grid option, and this allows us to either use Lightwave's grid settings, or we can set up a custom setting and type in a value. And that way we can snap to our grid in specific points. Right now our grid is set to 2 feet, so if I set this value to 2 feet, you'll notice that we snap directly on our grid, and there's no in-between values. If I set this to 1 foot, then we can see we were able to go in the in-between values. So if we're working with an object or a model that's going to be very specific values where we don't have sort of any in-between values and it's all regular numbers, then we don't have to worry about being inconsistent with the way we model. I'm going to change this back to our LW grid. So we're based on our Lightwave default grid setting, or whatever it is that we have set. And now we're going to take a look at our angle snap option. And for this I'm just going to go ahead and hit delete. I'm going to bring back our line tool, which is really going to be the best representation of this. And I'm going to turn on angle snap. And angle snap allows us to snap to specific values. So right now we have it set to 90 degrees. So we're only able to create lines, in this case, since we're using the line tool, at exact 90-degree angles. If I set this to 45, then we're creating a line every 45-degree angles. Set that to 30, and we could do every 30 degrees. And then we also have 15, and we could do every 5 degrees. And we can also go down to 1 degree. And that way we don't have any in-between values. So it's very cool. If you're going to be drawing walls, this is a fantastic snapping tool to have. If you're going to be drawing walls that are, of course, all 90-degree angles. Because then you can draw a room out very quickly, and I'll be showing that a little bit later once we actually start working on a floor plan. If we move all the way down to the bottom of our snap panel, we can see we have a clear all feature, and that allows us to clear out all of the different snapping options and just set it back to default. I'm going to go ahead and hit the spacebar and just remove this line I created, and I'm just going to create a very simple shape. And we're going to take a look at that top option that we have, which is background layer snap. Now, right now, background layer snap is on, and in previous versions of LWCAD, it was always on. But now we have the option to disable it. And let's just take a look at our ability to snap with background layer. So now I've just gone to our first layer, and I've got our second layer, which is the one we were working in the background, just by checking this little tab. And if we go to create an object, I'm going to turn on end and point snap, and you can see we can snap to our object in a previous layer. And this is very, very cool for modeling and very useful, because if we want to separate our different layers and we don't want the other object getting in the way, or we don't want to overwrite points, we still have the ability to use all of our different snapping options. But now in the newest version of LWCAD, we have the ability to turn that off in case we don't want that getting in the way. So this way we can still use our snapping options and look at the object in the background, but not have to worry about it or our object that we're creating snapping to that object. So I'm going to turn off BG layer snap, and now you can see that we're no longer snapping to these objects, but we can still snap to the object that it is we are creating. Also note with our closed line, within our numeric panel, that is turning on since we have our snapping options on and we're snapping to our last point. So very cool. Also note that with most of these tools, you can turn them on and off as you're working with a tool. But with the background layer snap, if I turn that on right now while we're already using the line tool, we will notice that we can't snap to anything. So always keep in mind whether or not you want that on or off, because if you already have a tool initialized, it won't work until you reset the tool. So now I've re-enabled that tool, and we can see we're snapping once again. So when we're in the middle of a current tool, we cannot turn that on and off. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just delete this current object that we have and start out on a fresh layer in layer 1 now. We're just going to go through all the different primitives. Basically, like I was saying before, they're pretty straightforward, but there are a couple of things about them where settings do change, and we can see that in the numeric values. I'm just going to close out our snap panel right now because we're not going to need that up. And we've already gone over the line tools, so let's go ahead and take a look at our curve. Our curve tool is very neat. It gives us the ability to draw out a specific shape by drawing out a certain number of points. Also keep in mind that this is limited to 8 points. If I go to click out and draw more points for our line, notice we can't create any more. So each of these curves is limited to our 8 points. And that's one thing to keep in mind if we're going to be closing our curve. So I already have 8 points created. So if I click close curve, it's going to take our last point we created and join it to our first. So go turn on close curve. And we can see it's not really joining up. There we go. Just clicked it a couple of times, and then it shows up. But it moved our last point to our starting position. I'm going to bring our snap panel back up and have point mode on. And end. What we can also do is turn on show distance and show angle, so we can see the area. And this is the angles that's between our controller points and not our actual curve points, because they are a little bit different. But that's definitely one thing to keep in mind if you are going to be closing, is that you want to have 7 points and then your 8th point be your closed curve. Now this doesn't really limit you too much, because if we wanted to, I could just right mouse click to start a new curve, and we can snap to the end of our previous curve and just sort of join them together. So you can still create longer curves. They just need to be separated into separate curves. So now we have a nice blend between these two, even though they've been created separately. And it's almost a good thing in a way, because that way we don't have a ridiculous amount of lines or points within our curve that we need to cycle through if we're going to be doing any editing. So it is sort of a nice feature. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And next we're going to take a look at our arc function. If we click and drag out, you can see we're drawing our initial points. So we could snap these to the ends of an object, and then we can pull out to create our curve. So if we were to create maybe an arch doorway, we could have a rectangle shape created, and then we could just snap to those top 2 points and draw our curve out. And now there's 2 different ways to draw this curve, or to edit it and modify it. Right now you can see we have 4-point mode on, and that gives us 4 controlling points. We have 1 in the top, 1 in the center between our outside points, and then our outside points. If we switch this over to tangent mode, you can see we get a total of 6 different points to edit with, and we have our controllers on the side, and basically affecting these side points. It's really almost like editing 3 points overall, because we have 1 point right here which controls our width, and then we have this point down here which modifies in and out. But really editing this point and all of our corner points are basically the same, so editing any number of these is really going to end up creating the same sort of effect and the same sort of control. So we basically have our 2 side points and then any one of these outside controlling points. And you can also see that we can edit each of these points with our numeric, both back and forth between the different modes. And we also have our curve Boolean options, and those are available for all of our different primitives. So I'm going to hit the spacebar, delete, and we're going to move on to our arc angle. Just going to pull this out, and now you can see just another way of creating an arc. So a lot of this really depends on what sort of shape you're already working with and what you need to snap to. So we can take these different points, and you can see it's actually very similar to our 4-point mode in a way. But like I said, it's really dependent on what it is you're snapping to and what it is that you need in order to create your specific arc. Because you end up with the same result, you get an arc either way, but it's really just how you control that arc. And then we can turn on the radius and show angle as well. Spacebar to clear that out. And we can see we have our circle tool, which we've already kind of gone over, and if you look at the numeric options, they're pretty straightforward. Not really a lot of explaining need to be done. Our next tool is the ellipse tool, which allows us to sort of draw out a rectangular shape, and inside of that we have our circle. So this way we can create a nice elliptical shape, and we can also adjust our width and our height based on specific settings. And you can also see I'm still snapping to that 1-foot mode that we had in here for our value. but we can go in between if we wanted to turn off that snapping. I'm just going to leave it to 1 foot right now. Delete that. And our next is our rectangle mode, which is straightforward. Draw it from one corner and pull out to the other side. And then we can use these different points on the side to snap to other objects. We can also move these points within. So if we had, I'm going to go ahead and hit the space bar, create another rectangle. And delete this other one actually. And we'll start out with another rectangle. Pull this out. So now if I wanted to only snap to a point, I can move this out and snap, so I don't necessarily have to be in the center. Because right now we don't have near on, and that way we don't really snap to anything. But I can pull this off to the side and snap right there. I can also do it with these side ones and snap. And that way, it's sort of a projective snapping in a way. Because we don't have to draw out this side, because if I was to move this up and snap, you could see we're connecting. But if I just wanted to align these two different rectangles, I can use these middle control points to do so. And we also have another rectangle, which is our Rec 3P. And now in order to draw this out, instead of drawing from one corner to the other, first we click and we specify and drag out one of our sides. And then our next click is going to be expanding. Now right now we can also see we have extend mode on. And that means if we're extending from one object. So if I had maybe another square right here, I could select the 2 points and just extend it without creating another point or another line that's maybe not needed. If I turn extend mode off, then we end up with a full rectangle. And I can also use this once again to snap to other objects using this control. And if we take a look at our top viewport underneath, we can also see this little E down here. And that just allows us to enable that extend mode without having to actually go into the numeric panel. Although personally, I prefer to just have the numeric panel up so we can snap back and forth between that. And that's pretty much all of our basic primitives.